My friends, I want to toast each of you who have given so much of your time and resources to this program, and to thinking about what do you do next, and how do you make it all meaningful for you as you move on in your lives and careers as leaders. I want to thank you for being on this journey with me as I juggled COVID and as you endured nasal swabs every time I got to see you. I usually like to hug people first, but I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for all the conversations that we had this morning about who we are as a state, as people, and what that means to the possibilities as we move forward. And I guess I want to say I'm just damn glad that we're all here together. And I want to thank all your supporters back home. We have at least there we go, one spouse. Chris, your spouse's name, I forget. Carrie. And Laura Buxbaum, supporting Amy. And then we have two folks here from Maine Community Foundation as well. Do you want to introduce?
Sure.
Yeah?
You have an alum from the Phi class?
Yes.
Woo, Lori Young. And this is my boss. But it's okay. He's not going to be my boss too much longer, so you don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
Sterling Spearin. And they have been nothing but supportive of the journey.
Jealous of the journey. And encouraging of the future collaboration of MCF and the program to think about how we
can
do more together. So, all right. Oh yes, Lisa is over there too, yes.
I think she's here supporting me, although I think she's just making sure I'm here doing something and not.
We can talk about that.
This is Lisa Beeler. She's business development manager.
Yeah, thank you. Any other guests that I'm missing? No.
I should say that I'm Chi class, though.
Oh, that's right, Chi class. Yes. Thank you. You'll notice that there are cameras around, and we are capturing our graduation speaker and also our Kaylin. Both of our graduation speakers will be captured on video, and unfortunately I have to do it too. So that's what's happening today. Thank you. So, anyone else want to add to the toast before we toast to each other?
I'll add a thank you to you, Jan.
Oh. And Julie. Thank you.
And to Julie.
That means another sip. So, all right, let me put this down. So thank you again very much. I have some other people to thank. We do have some sponsors for today's luncheon and our graduation. Bangor Savings Bank, BSB, who's been a steady partner with us in most of what we do. People's United, thank you very much. Haley Ward, thank you. Chenbro and LL Bean. So thank you for helping to make this possible for our class. This very special experience possible for our class. It's not just the graduation. This is really important to have this support to make this opportunity possible for you all. So thank you. We have two special speakers today. I'll be saying a few words. I'm the third. And then we have Gilda Nardone, who's also a graduation from, you all met her earlier, Delta class, the fourth class. And things have changed a little bit, she says. I think there were still some exciting outward bound experiences, but there definitely have been some changes. There was not a stand and deliver in that class. Was there one in yours? Yeah. Was there one in yours, Laura? Stand and deliver?
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's come to be a really critical part of the program. You see how they said it? Oh, yeah, definitely. Did you like it as much?
Well, I have a friend who didn't do it, and she regrets it.
Oh, yeah. It's the opportunity to really get to know people. So things have changed a bit. And things are changing in Gilda's life, but she doesn't, on the program it says retired. I am not quite sure that she knows how to do that. I think she's going to have to grow into it, perhaps with some coaching. But she is the retired executive director of New Ventures Maine, Leadership Maine alum Delta, and recipient of the 2020 Kenneth M. Curtis Leadership Award for her outstanding leadership over many years. Gilda was the executive director for 43 years before retiring at the end of 2021. She was responsible for strategic planning, fund development, and financial management, and leadership development of staff and advisory council members for the statewide organization. She also worked with their civic engagement efforts, and she's helped people one at a time who needed help to be able to find their path to achieve their goals as it relates to their education. And she's been a good partner for MDF as we think about our work around adult promise. You've heard a lot about that over the last couple of days and earlier. Gilda was one of the original. Before it was even called Adult Promise, you were part of the original team thinking about how do we make it possible for people in Maine to get the credentials they need to fill jobs, yes, but also to make their lives what they want them to be by having the earnings and the opportunity. So thank you, Gilda, for all of that. And Gilda is our graduation speaker today. You ready? And here's this. You're setting up your slides.
All right. And am I mic'd? Yep. Okay. So thank you to those of you who did the stand and deliver this morning, because when Jan told me I had to do basically a stand and deliver, it was a little unnerving. So, great, good. And I do use notes. I can't remember who went this morning who used notes. Yes. So, and we just determined that the podium was too tall. So I will try not to read everything, but I will be looking down periodically. So again, thanks to Jan, Julie, and MDF for inviting me, and thank you all for being so welcoming to me when I came last night. I felt very much a part of this group, an honorary part of this group since I've been here. So happy to share my leadership journey, particularly as you embarked on what's next for each of you in your own ways. So my organization's 40th anniversary, and as Jan indicated, my retirement, has given me an opportunity to reflect on what this journey has been over the past really 4 decades and more. And I think some themes have emerged, and you're going to hear some themes that I heard over last night and today as well. Resilience, adaptation, and persistence, education and lifelong learning, relationships and the value of stories. That came up. I'll talk more about that. And planning for and managing change. I grew up in Aroostook County. There's at least a couple of us here, maybe more, in Presque Isle. In a somewhat traditional, lower working class family. My father, who had graduated from high school, was stationed at Presque Isle during World War II. He was in the Air Force, and met my mother, and they settled. She was from Aroostook County, and they settled there. He was always the wage earner, sometimes working 1, 2, or 3 jobs at a time. And my mother was the homemaker, although she was the one that had the college degree from Maine in home economics. But it was important to him that she be the homemaker. We were always expected to contribute. My father had a huge garden. Oh, I should say that we were one of only 2 Italian families living in Presque Isle at the time. My father had a huge garden. My grandfather was a truck farmer. And we foraged and picked potatoes from a very early age, foraged for fiddleheads and blueberries and all kinds of things like that. as I transitioned from 8th grade to high school, my parents sat me down and said, we can't afford to send you to college, so you need to learn a skill. And at that point, I didn't know how to challenge that. I just sort of accepted that. That's sort of what a girl did, I guess, or what I did at that point. So all through high school, I had 1 foot in college prep classes and 1 foot in business classes. And, you know, I still regret that I don't have a stronger math and science background. And if I could go back, I would do that differently. It was the mid-'60s, and there was a noticeable lack of any kind of career education. And the occupations for women at the time were traditionally teacher, nurse, or secretary. So that's kind of the world that I knew and grew up in. I do want to recognize 2 women who recognized leadership potential in me way before I ever saw it in myself. And this is my Aunt Gilda, from whom I am named. I'll probably cry after a while, so just know that about me. She was a physical education teacher and a women's sports coach way before Title IX and in the Philadelphia area. And I just regret that I didn't get to spend more time with her growing up, and she passed way sooner than I would have liked. Let's see if I can make this work. So the next person is a woman named Glenna Smith. She was my English teacher in high school, and she was also a drama coach, a wonderful writer and storyteller in her own right, who passed away recently at 100. So she lived a very, very full life. My father died suddenly at 47 in my senior year in high school, and our whole life, just transformed. My mother became what I would later learn was a displaced homemaker. Ironically, it made our family eligible for financial aid. We may have been anyway beforehand, but we didn't understand it. Where's the famed person? We didn't understand about financial aid or FAFSA or any of that. So I ended up going to Westbrook College, now part of UNE, in the secretarial program. But it was a wonderful learning experience for me. I then moved to Boston in the late 60s, early 70s, when the second wave of the women's movement was emerging. And I started taking a few night classes in women's studies at BU, and my whole world opened up, both understanding issues that I'd never thought about growing up in a rustic, which was and sometimes still can be pretty isolating. And as I myself began to experience both gender and economic inequality. So it was it was an exciting time and an important time for me. I spent the next 10 years moving, whoops, I have a photo, sorry. So, I did once have brown hair. And you probably can't read the balloon, but one of them says, end sex stereotyping in jobs. So I continued to work in what are relatively lower wage jobs, secretary and childcare worker, while I volunteered in the emerging women's movement on Cape Cod at that time. I participated in and then helped facilitate consciousness raising groups. I edited a newsletter. The poet Marge Piercy was one of our contributors. And I volunteered at a rape crisis center. During that time, I finished my bachelor's degree through self-directed study at UMass, Amherst, called University Without Walls. So already knew that I wanted to direct my learning experiences. And then I later got my master's degree at Wheelock College, which ironically now is part of BU, in educational administration. I moved back after Wheelock, I moved back to Maine in 1978. I saw an ad for a coordinator of a displaced homemaker program, which I really didn't understand, and applied and actually got the position. In 1977, legislation had been introduced and passed in Maine to serve this generation of women that had been homemakers, and then because of some change in their life circumstance, either separation, divorce, widowhood, or the disability of their spouse, needed to re-enter the paid labor market. Somebody mentioned the initial allocation was $10,000, which paid my salary and benefits when I started. So we have come a long way. Yeah, I'll get this process down here. So I do want to acknowledge my colleague, Eloise Vitelli. I think what has been really important to me and my organizational leadership is to have a colleague who really we worked together as a team. We had different roles. We sort of emerged based on our skills. But she and I worked together for many years before she retired, and some of you know that she's now the state Senate Majority Leader. We met in a graduate class called Counseling Women and Girls Across Their Lifespan. And I think neither of us understood that actually would later become our work and our lives. You know, over those 4 decades, we lived that. We lived working with women at a younger age through their older ages. So my and our focus has always been on gender and economic equity and justice, but that has included Indigenous, immigrant, and other women of color. And most of our work is really helping people through changes in their lives and helping them develop skills and then figure out what's next in their journeys. So we began with, I should say that I started with the first group of displaced homemakers. I was young, I was 30. They thought I was a little young because they were all in their mid-50s. And they sort of thought, what can we learn from you? But I started with what I knew how to do, which was facilitating support groups. And that first group of women really taught me what we needed to be teaching. And from that first group, we really developed our curriculum in different program areas. And so let me just share those briefly. So the first was career and education planning, helping individual women. It was primarily women at that point. It has evolved over time, expand their vision of what was possible. And at that point, we were spending a lot of time helping them translate their homemaking and volunteer skills into the marketplace. How do you talk about those years and what skills you learned, and how do you talk about that in an interview and interest an employer and helping understand that you would bring skills. We were talking at lunch today, and I'll touch on this in a minute. I think we're seeing that now after the pandemic when a number of women went out of the workforce. And actually, I think there's now an app for doing what we used to do with pen and paper. I'm particularly proud of the program that we have done for several years now with support from Jimbro and many other employers called Totally Trades. So for, I think, almost 20 years now, we've worked with, and before the pandemic, it was hands-on at community colleges and the career and technical centers, bringing girls from a wide region together to explore what some of the career opportunities are in trades and technology. So they get a chance to weld and to drive big dump trucks and code. Now we've added coding. So it's a, and I particularly loved going to the conferences at Northern Maine Community College because for me it was full circle to go back to where I grew up and to make sure that girls were given an opportunity to understand that really the world is maybe not limitless, but that there are lots of possibilities for what any one individual can do as they want to move forward. I was also saying to our colleague at Chimbro that our first placement at BIW, I don't think there's anybody from BIW here, our first placement at BIW was a celebration. And when she wanted to advance, she was told that their policy, that HR policy was only one woman in any unit area at a time, and she challenged that with our support. So times have changed in some ways. And then, I've sort of forgotten let's see what's next. Okay, that's my leadership main class, okay. Then we added entrepreneurship. Women had long been supporting family businesses, and we talked about farms. They'd been farm wives, as my grandmother was, but they weren't recognized as having the ability to really be their own, to own their own businesses and to thrive in that. And I really want to credit our colleagues at CEI, Ellen Golden, and specifically, I mean, she was and many others were our partners in this early work of really demonstrating that women had the skills to be entrepreneurs and to thrive as entrepreneurs. And we also, so again, that involved training in business planning, networking, and access to credit. And we also did a lot of education around community economic development. MDF was started at around the same time. At that point, economic development was pretty much seen as organizations vying for bringing businesses to the state from away, and there was really not a focus on what community economic development could look like, and there's really been an enormous shift with that, and and I also credit MDF and their Main Street work as well. And then we later added financial education and asset building because we began to understand that whether someone was going to have a job or own their own business, they needed to understand finances and needed to be comfortable with finances no matter how much resources they had. And we work with people with very limited resources for the most part. But through a number of match savings programs and other partners, we're able to help individuals and families begin to save so they have some money for emergency expenses so that their finances aren't thrown for a loop when their car dies or they need medical help. And then for longer term asset goals like education, car ownership and repair, business ownership, home ownership, and then ultimately retirement. It's really scary for us when we work with people who have not saved anything for retirement, and so it's an ongoing process of helping individuals and families begin to have those resources. So now, that was all of the background. So in terms of leadership, this was my Leadership Maine class. I think throughout the years, I've taken advantage of opportunities for me to learn and grow. One of the early ones was Leadership Maine, and to build relationships with colleagues across the state, across the New England region, and nationally. And that's really was a wonderful opportunity for me. Some of you heard me share the story last night around the fire. One of the first skills we learned in our class was resilience because we were going to Hurricane Island, and there was a hurricane, so we couldn't go out in the boat. So our first team building exercise was, we were given $20 and we had to go buy food for supper to decide what we're going to have, and purchase it in the grocery store, and then come back and cook it. And we slept on the floor of the former Island Institute office. So learned a lot of important skills there. I think, yeah. Well, for each group, right, yeah. In retrospect, I thought, why didn't we team up across small groups? But that didn't come to me. I mean, it sort of started to happen when we were all cooking together, and we're like, oh, you bought something. Anyway, we didn't do that. We didn't have the relationships yet to do that. So I just want to acknowledge, none of the work that I've done has been only with me. These are a couple of visuals of our staff over the years. Hold on, yes, okay. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I've lost my space. And then I think for us, and the issue of stories has come up a lot today, over this last couple of days. So for us, it really is the courage and tenacity of the women and men, individually and collectively, who have shared their lives and their journeys with us, not dissimilar to the bonds that you have and the community that you've created here. Their stories have grounded our policy and advocacy work, and I think it's what's helped us be more effective in that. So and it's a model of leadership development. It's sort of, Jan, I think this is one we learned in our leadership cohort. It's sort of the concentric circles that move out from the self, leadership of self, and then moving out to community and to broader arenas. So I just want to share a few examples of that. It's always felt important for us to help women in particular, and now we have many men involved in that, to find their own voice and to tell their own story, and to be able to tell their story to the audience that they're speaking to. So how do you both understand your story and then adapt it so that whoever is listening can hear the points that you want to make? So over the years, we've collected those stories. And I just want to show some other examples. This is so you can see the homemaker's career in the background. So because our organization gets state funding, we've always educated about the legislative process, help people understand how it works, what level decisions are made about the issues that are important to them in their lives, whether it's a community level, the state level, or at the federal level. And this was early on, we had done a day at the State House, and I'm not sure we could do this with appropriations anymore, but women baked homemade pies, and we shared slices with the Appropriations Committee, and actually it was a big hit. So this is another example of some of our graduates. Every 2 years we hold a legislative reception after the election to get to know new legislators, and for them to get to know and hear from our graduates, all of whom are their constituents in one form or another. We work obviously at the congressional level as well. This is a fun time, and that's Jill Lorem. And internationally too. This was a group. Our staff have done some work internationally and hosted a number of women coming to Maine who wanted to learn, particularly around the business development and the community economic development area. This is a group of women that came from the war-torn Balkan region, and the first day they were with us. 9/11 happened. So it was the most incredible experience, and we grew very close to those women, and they were incredibly supportive of what we were experiencing based on their own experiences. And then the one effort, and somebody spoke in the closing circle around the intersectionality of issues. One of the efforts we led, but with many other colleagues, was creating a Maine Women's Economic Security Agenda to frame policy decisions. It's not as active as I might like to see at this point, but what we learned early on is that women can't be successful in employment or business ownership without freedom from violence and access to health care, to child and elder care, and retirement savings. So we brought our coalition partners together to identify all of those issues as a women's economic security issue. My own leadership has evolved over the years. Certainly graduate school for me, Leadership Maine, and some other opportunities provided the grounding for me to be a collaborative, participatory, organizational manager and leader. That was really important to me. Early on, I thought you just sort of created that environment and it sort of happened magically. What I've learned is that it's a constant process. Whenever any new employee comes into an organization, it shifts the dynamics. And so always it's a process of listening and encouraging participation and really, I think, building the best from everybody in the organization. It's been about building and nurturing strategic relationships, having mentors and opportunities for gaining experience and skills, and for me that was both on a New England and national level, and recognizing and supporting leadership potential in others. So, and I think the last area is one that came up this morning. It's learning about racism and understanding what my role as an older white woman needs to be an authentic ally in addressing that. And I do want to thank the Maine Community Foundation. Jan and I had an opportunity to participate in another similar learning experience called the Leadership Learning Exchange for Equity. And it was Steve Rowe's vision, I think, to bring together white leaders to do our work so that we would be ready to do the work with our allies of color. So if any of you get that program is now under the auspices of Thomas College. So if any of you are interested in that issue and want to further your own learning around that, I would strongly recommend it. Okay. All right. Hold on, okay. I'm so used to having a podium. For me, my greatest teaching moments have been experiencing personal loss. I think starting with my father, and then my brother died suddenly from a heart attack during the pandemic. And Allison, you asked, you asked if I'd been back to the county, and I haven't. It was really hard for me not to be able to grieve with family and friends, and particularly because his death was so sudden. So I know that for me, I need to go back to bring some closure to that, but and we'll do that, right? But the other learning is, as I mentioned, has been through the physical, stretching my physical limits. And those are stories for another day. But I will just say that I was in the front of the raft because I was the only one who'd ever been rafting before and fell out. So luckily, the guide pulled me back in, and that's why I'm in the back of the raft. And he said to me, "Get back out front." And I said, "You got to be kidding me! I am not." But I did eventually. So it's also learning humility. This is me on the knife edge. And the short version there is I came down from Katahdin in the dark with a headlamp. Whole story there. You can tell the light. It's beautiful light, but not where you want to be at the top. And then for a couple of years, our organization was the beneficiary of a triathlon, and I blithely agreed to do the swim leg because I knew how to swim. I don't see myself as an athlete. I'm a very physical person, and both training and then swimming over a mile in the ocean off Old Orchard Beach was a real challenging lesson. So, and I think the last thing I would say is being a parent. Am I running over? Are you standing up because I'm running? No. Okay. These are my two sons that I love on Bradbury Mountain. But I think any of us who are parents in whatever form learn life lessons every day. So what's next? Jan sort of framed that for you. For me, despite the gains that women have made in education, employment, business, politics, and sports, shout out to the professional women's soccer players who now are earning the same as the males. There's still an 83% pay and gender pay gap, which persists and is worse for women of color, and the cumulative effect on older women living in poverty. We've talked a little bit about the pandemic laid bare the inequalities of gender and race as women were laid off from direct care and service sector jobs and left the workforce to care for children and elder parents, exposing gaps in our family leave, unemployment, healthcare, and infrastructure policies. Women's access to reproductive health care and justice is seriously threatened, and Casco Bay is warming. So clearly, education and advocacy is needed as much now as ever. So for me, it's remembering and building alliances with those who have gone before. This is me and Eloise now, with our founding legislators, Barbara Trafton and Merle Nelson, who crafted the first displaced homemaker legislation and who've been incredible allies for us over the years. And this is our colleagues, me and my colleagues with Gloria Steinem. And the woman to the right of Gloria is Janet Smith, my successor at New Ventures Maine, and also a Leadership Maine alum. Oh, very good. Okay. So should I wrap up real quick? Okay. So for me, it's supporting the and being inspired by the next generation of leaders. And I was honored that as part of my retirement, it prompted further investment in a scholarship in my name for any of our graduates who want to start a complete college. I'm a passionate supporter of adult learners, as Jan has also already mentioned. And I want to just talk a little bit about Leanna, and then I'll finish up. Leanne came to our organization as a single parent with a young child leaving an abusive relationship. Through the support of a number of individuals and organizations, she started a business. She became an advocate for domestic violence survivors. She enrolled and graduated from UMA and delivered the student graduation address and received a full scholarship from the Thurgood Marshall School of Law in Texas. She recently graduated with her law degree, received the Pro Bono Champion Award, and is a trained mediator focusing on family, divorce, child custody, and domestic violence. She's also studying to pass the bar exam with a high enough score to practice in all 50 states, and we hope she comes back to Maine. And in closing, it's, caring for the environment, from solar panels on my roof to rewilding my property with native plants. And I'll skip the other parts of that. So, in closing, my challenge to you is, how will you apply your leadership skills and connections from Leadership Maine and beyond to make a difference, whether it's for gender identity, racial, economic, or environmental justice, or another issue that you're passionate about? What will be your leadership legacy? So again, and then remember to have fun and be present with your family and friends in the process. So. Thank you.
I just want to ask a question. Does this sound like someone who's retiring? I was thinking about some of the conversation we've had around our stand and delivers and finding our purpose, Gilda. And Gilda, this is an amazing story of a human being, a woman, who found her purpose and dedicated all of who she is, all of her life almost, to this purpose. So thank you. And thank you for your inspirational story. Thanks. Do you want to do that? Will I do something else?
I was just gonna, I don't have anything other than leadership.
Just turn it off, yeah. Okay. So, we are heading toward that time when we're going to ask one of our speakers to come up from the class, as well as show a video from Jeff, who's home with COVID. We had COVID issues this year, nonetheless, definitely. So I also know that as the class has rolled out over the last couple of days, I've been getting a little pressure around stand and deliver and history, and people got aggravated because I told my life story to like 5 people and not the rest. So, so I'm not going to tell my life story, sorry, but I am going to tell this story. One of the things that I talked about with the group outside of Timbers was this ability to be a seeker, to constantly be looking for what's the best in each of us. What do we have in our state that I have fallen in love with now? How do I highlight who we are? And I've asked myself at times where that came from. Why do I? And you asked me that too, Alex, when we were talking. Why am I a seeker? It started when I was 4. I'm not going to tell the whole story. You all know how old I am. I told you last night. But when I was 4, I lived in the Florida Keys. And my parents' house was at the end of called Lime Lane. It's a private lane. But when you go to the other side, go walk down the road, there's a seawall. And I would look out at the ocean, and I'd like, whoa, this is really pretty. But then I would look down, and the water was so clear that I could see all of the life under the sea, under the surface, and what was going on. And that was my first kind of hint as a little kid of how complicated it all is and how much is below the surface. And it made me curious about wanting to see it. I eventually became a scuba diver so I could go under and see it close up. But that journey continued. I lived in the Florida Keys where my parents had taken us kids, or actually I was born there, so my parents had moved from South Georgia as farmers in a very different culture to say, where can we raise our children? And they took us to the Florida Keys, which was the Wild West at the time that I was there. Nothing like it is today, but it was the Wild West for us. And that's where I was able to get up close and personal with the ocean. But after that, my father went to work further up the coast to Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy. And he was an electrician, but every day he went into the vertical assembly building. This was during the Apollo program. I remember sitting at home with my family, knowing my father worked at Cape Kennedy, and watching the moon landing, and having seen the Apollo launches, and then after that, seeing the shuttle launches. And remembering that all came out of the drive from President Kennedy when he said, we're going to go to the moon. And people said, oh no, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And then people like my father and 100 others, thousands of others who were scientists, designers, engineers, they made it happen. They made it happen when people said it wasn't possible. And I was so proud that my family was there and part of all of that. And it made me want to explore. You know, how can I find what is most meaningful for me? How can I find what it is that is going to give me that kind of joy and pursuit in life? So I ended up going to the University of Georgia, got a minors in psychology, got a master's in journalism. Never used the journalism stuff, and wish I had majored in psychology and gotten a master's or a doctorate based on my experience afterwards. But that's not what I did, and I ended up not doing much with that, but I ended up working in manufacturing for 20 years. And in manufacturing, there are divisions of labor. There are the people who work at the top and the people who work at the bottom, and they rarely get into the same room together. They're not called in to be part of the strategic planning or the decision-making processes or problem solving. It's like, we'll go do that in our offices and then we'll tell you what to do. My job was breaking that down and working with people who were working on the manufacturing floor, training them, helping them to be part of the business in a way that they had not been before. Part of solving problems, part of making decisions about their work area. Managers went on the floor and worked in the same jobs as the employees did to better understand what those employees were going through and how we needed to design a human workplace. And there were a lot of assumptions about each other in those days, and there still are, I know. But there was this one guy who everybody said was worthless, right? Worthless. Why? It was a bias. It was a bias. He was huge. He was huge in body. But I found he was huge in spirit, and huge in commitment, and huge in intelligence. And what he did in his little area where he was managing the scrap process, essentially, for the organization, he went through my training. I would go out to talk to him. I have never talked so much about scrap in all my life. He'd have his little notebook there. He'd tell me exactly what he had done during the day, how much scrap he had recycled. And I had the pleasure of talking to my boss and everybody and saying, look what he did. And we counted him out. We counted him out. And who else are we counting out? What are the other possibilities as we think about folks on the manufacturing floor or who are working for us in jobs where we're not using all of their talents? What is it that we can do? And I did leave manufacturing after 20 years when I said, how do I want to put all these skills to work? And I went to Hurricane Island Outward Bound School, Gilda, and was on that island a lot, where I was working with people who every day of their lives were taking students out to push them into what they call value-forming experiences. Gilda, right? Value-forming experiences, not so they could just get outside of their box, but so they could figure out what is it that's important to me and what am I passionate about? What do I want to achieve in my life? And so they could understand each other by hearing their stories. They were out on course for 3 weeks on a 30-foot boat, sleeping on the oars. They had a lot of chance to tell stories and to really challenge each other and to find within themselves how they wanted to be in the world and what they wanted to contribute. And so then I was challenged in another program. I was in one of these programs like you are today, where I had to come up, well, what is your, they didn't call it stand and deliver at the time, but I had to come up with, what's your vision? What's important to you? What's your commitment? And I realized that my commitment had emerged over time, but I had embodied it before I knew it, right? I had realized what I was passionate about innately before it came up to my head. It was in my heart. And here are the words that I use, and it's building on the words of Kurt Hahn. There is more in me than I know. There is more in you than you think. And there is more in all of us put together than we can possibly imagine. And how can I be of service to that statement, not only today, but every day in my life, no matter how old I am? Thank you, Gilda, for continuing to provide that role modeling. But how do I continue to live that? Finding the possibility in each of us, in each of you, and you all have certainly demonstrated that as we've gone through this time together. And I want to thank you for being all in. And if you want to hear the rest of my life story, we can do it later over a drink. But that's why I do what I do. So, thank you. So, our first speaker is Kaylin O'Brien from WEX. Kaylin is leaving for Ireland soon, but come on up.
All right, thank you. Sure. All right. Let me make sure I'm not going to try to read you guys one of my emails here. It's probably not what you came for. All right. I like to ask questions. And in fact, it's apparently my affinity for asking questions that got me the gig as your class speaker. Thanks to Alex, who nominated me and referred to me in the nomination email as the closer. Since apparently, over the course of the last 9 months, I've developed a reputation for being the person who always seems to get in one last big closing question for whoever the speaker or the panelist happened to be that day. It's actually affirming to realize that people know you for one of the things you happen to like most about yourself. I like to ask questions. And I ask questions because I believe questioning things is this rare, beautiful experience we actually get as human beings. And we don't have to accept the world as it is. We get to question it. I was the kid growing up who always wanted to know why. I think I drove my parents nuts. This affliction followed me to college, where I found in my freshman year that philosophy was something you could study. And it's a discipline that exists purely for the purpose of asking a lot of questions. And because of that, I went on to study philosophy in grad school, where I found that I was surrounded by other people who liked to ask questions as much as I did. But it was there, asking a lot of questions around people who like to ask each other questions and then question the questions you would ask one another. You see where this is going? It was there I realized the power of good questions. Questions create the space for new ideas, new thinking, new ways of looking at things. And they're an invitation we can give to one another to join us in some sort of collective exploration. I also think the right question can be a catalyst for change. When you're the type of person, like me, who enjoys playing around with questions and ideas, you also learn to appreciate good questions asked by other people. And throughout our time in Leadership Maine, there was one question that stood out to me. We were in the back classroom of the Green Ladle in Lewiston, listening to the last speaker before lunch, Jennifer Hutchins, Executive Director of the Maine Association for Nonprofits, who also happens to be a Leadership Maine alumni. Towards the end of her talk, she started to address the role nonprofits play in the economic development goals Maine is striving towards. And then she said, yes, you need a strong economy, but for what purpose? Just to have a strong economy? Or is the goal to actually have prosperous communities? And a strong economy just happens to be one part of that. Those were good questions. And they were questions that I hadn't heard from anyone in all of the other conversations we had had up until that point about economic development. What's the purpose of it? And what do we want to do with our strong economy once we get it? And perhaps even more challenging, what do we do in the moments when economic vitality might actually be at odds with community prosperity? With her good questions, Jennifer seemed to be challenging us to consider that we might lose sight of things if we only focus on the strong economy as the end goal. What might we get instead if we collectively committed ourselves to the pursuit of prosperous communities? Her question stuck with me, because I think when you ask the right question, you end up being able to have a better conversation. Perhaps a more challenging conversation, but also a more fruitful one, and perhaps a more important one. So what would we gain if we aligned our goals first and foremost with community prosperity? This is the point in the speech where I have to make a small confession. After sitting around the bonfire last night, listening to folks sharing stories and carrying on jokes and laughter left over from dinner conversation, and just genuinely seeming to enjoy each other's company, I decided I was going to rewrite the second half of this speech. So here are some thoughts I organized only this morning. When I think about our experience here as part of the Casco class for Leadership Maine, I'm realizing that so much of what we have been doing together over these last 9 months has been oriented towards this idea of community. Yes, it's been about the Maine communities we've visited, the community leaders we've learned from, the inspiring organizations doing good work to make their communities better. But it's also been about creating a unique type of communal connection amongst all of us. And I saw that spark of community yesterday, sitting around a fire, and I saw it just a couple of hours ago as we all sat in that room reflecting on what's been created here amongst us. Leadership as a practice is inherently relational. Effective leadership doesn't happen as an act of an I, but instead in the power of we. But we don't spend enough time talking about just how hard it is to curate a we, to build a community. And I guess what I realized last night and what was affirmed this morning, and this is where you probably shouldn't scroll through a computer when you're trying to give a speech because we're no longer on the right page. So let's try again. And I guess what I learned last night and what was affirmed this morning is that Leadership Maine is, in some way, about curating that we. Creating a space once a month for us to gather and consider how to contribute to prosperity for our individual communities also created space for us to build our own community here amongst us. And while it may have been temporary, I think it's still significant. So to bring it back to the original speech I was planning to give, perhaps that's what's at the heart of a prosperous community. Doing the work to create opportunities for individuals to get together and become a we. To gather in a way that allows for meaningful conversation and connection, and then leverage those meaningful connections to co-create the types of communities we all actually want to be a part of. What would we gain if we aligned our goals first and foremost to community prosperity? It really is a good question. So in closing, I suppose I'm walking away from my Leadership Maine experience feeling certain that the future of this state I've decided to call home is in good hands. Because now I know that each of you are the people working, contributing, thinking, questioning, showing up, and leading in communities across Maine. And that actually gives me hope. So thank you.
So thank you so much, Kaylin. That was beautiful. I really appreciate it. I wish you well on your journey. Do come back. So this is Jeff Badger. I know, it looks like. Jeff Badger, for those of you who don't know, is one of our participants. He is a singer-songwriter, and he was going to do his stand and deliver and got COVID. I don't know about that, but anyway, he was going to do his stand and deliver, but he actually decided to make a little combo here, stand and deliver and class talk that will be sharing with you today.
Hello, Migas Lodge. Are you ready to rock? Well, this is my song. It was originally going to be a stand and deliver, but I'm glad that it worked out this way because it allowed me to collaborate with all of you to get your memories on what's been a really great year. So this one goes out to you, Casco class. So they want me to stand and deliver, so I gotta go and figure just what I'm gonna talk about when my turn comes around. Should I talk about collecting vinyl or the endangered African rhino? Nothing's coming to mind. I'll just do it next time. So we're visiting factories and shit shipyards, city councils, and organic goat farms. Avoiding COVID outbreaks, we had to choose between waffles and pancakes. And after this year, I can definitely say that I've never worn so many hard hats. It's a good thing we all look like cuties, in safety glasses and disposable booties. And things didn't always feel right, like phosphorescent bioengineered field mice. But now we've reached the end of the line. Break it down. We traveled many miles together, but who's counting? 'Cause one day we're gonna get to the top of that mountain, even if we have to drive up it in a bus. So Scott, get the door please. Light up that fire, Tony. Our friends, we made it through this before Michelle burned down the storage units. Paddling canoes in the rain, coordinating and mock legislating all over Maine for a whole year with plenty of beer. So they want me to stand and deliver, so I gotta go and figure out my leadership vision without looking like I'm fishing for something to say. Should I make my submission rhyme? No, I'll just do it next time.
Thank you, everyone. Congratulations. Any last comments? Yes.
Will we take another group photo?
Yeah, we can do a quick group photo. Right down here, when we wrap up, we'll take another photo down there.
Excellent.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Any last announcements? Yeah. Thank you to our guests, the staff, and all of the families who are here to make it possible as well. So thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.
Go for it.